Hi, I'm Amy. Most people think that standing up to a bully requires shouting, dramatic confrontations, or expensive lawyers. But I've learned that the most devastating moves are the ones made in complete silence. When a power-hungry woman in my community set out to ruin me financially, she was 99% sure she had won. She had no idea that a tiny, overlooked detail was about to strip her of all her authority and set off a chain reaction no one saw coming. Before we dive into what happened, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And I'd love to know in the comments below, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now?
At 72, I've learned that peace of mind is worth more than gold. After 30 years of teaching middle school mathematics, I retired to a modest, charming craftsman home in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. I paid off my mortgage early, kept my property immaculate, and spent my mornings enjoying black coffee on the front porch. I didn't ask for drama, and I certainly didn't go looking for trouble. All I wanted was to enjoy the home I had worked my entire life to build. That summer, however, our state hit a historic heat wave, leading into one of the worst droughts our region had seen in 4 decades. The soil cracked, local reservoir levels plunged, and the city council didn't hesitate to act. Emergency mandatory water restrictions were slapped across every residential district within 48 hours. The ordinance was straightforward and firm. Municipal tap water was strictly reserved for essential indoor household use. Automatic sprinklers were banned. Hose watering was restricted to 10 minutes on Tuesday mornings only, and violators faced steep municipal fines that doubled with every offense. As a former teacher, I've always believed that rules exist to keep order and protect the community. When authority figures set guidelines based on clear data, you follow them. So when the mayor announced the emergency mandate on local television, emphasizing that non-essential water usage could compromise the city's fire safety reserves, I didn't complain or look for loopholes.
I simply adapted. For anyone with an ounce of common sense, the right choice was obvious. Grass isn't immortal, but it's remarkably resilient. Turf grass naturally goes dormant during extreme heat and lack of water, turning a dull shade of yellow-brown to preserve its root system. It isn't dead. It's simply sleeping until the autumn rains return. Being a pragmatic woman who respects the law and values common sense over cosmetic perfection, I turned off my automated irrigation system immediately. My neighbor down the street, Gary, stopped by my driveway on the second week of the ban while I was out sweeping dried leaves off my walkway. He looked at my lawn, then at his own patchy yard, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You're actually following the city mandate, Amy? My wife is losing her mind over our yellowing grass," Gary said, frowning at his front yard. "It's just water, Gary," I replied, leaning on my broom handle. "The lawn will bounce back in the fall. The city needs water in the reservoirs more than we need an emerald carpet in July. Besides, I have no intention of throwing away my pension on city fines just to keep grass green." "I hear you," Gary sighed, shaking his head. "I just hope everyone else plays by the same rules. You know how some people around here get about curb appeal." "The city law overrides personal preferences," I said firmly. "We're in a crisis. It's that simple." I believed in doing my part. It was a matter of civic duty and basic logic. If the local government asked us to conserve water during an ecological emergency, you conserved water, period. Over the next few weeks, my yard slowly transitioned from a lush green to a dry golden tan, matching every other responsible homeowner's yard on the block. I kept my hedges neatly trimmed, my walkway swept clean, and my flower beds completely free of weeds. My property wasn't vibrant, but it was neat, lawful, and well-maintained given the circumstances. I assumed my neighbors possessed the same practical judgment and respect for authority. I thought the community understood that survival came before aesthetics. I was wrong. I failed to factor in one crucial variable that didn't care about city laws, drought emergencies, or basic human decency. I forgot about our homeowners association, and more importantly, I severely underestimated the power-hungry mindset of its newly elected president, Brenda. Brenda took over the HOA board 6 months prior, and she treated her position like she was managing a military outpost rather than a suburban neighborhood. She was obsessed with curb appeal, property values, and asserting absolute control over every driveway, mailbox, and blade of grass on our street. To Brenda, the drought was merely an inconvenience that threatened her vision of a picture-perfect neighborhood. It was a hot Tuesday morning when I saw her marching down my driveway. She wasn't just walking, she was conducting an inspection. In her left hand, she carried a clipboard stacked with official HOA notice forms. In her right, she held an acrylic yellow ruler. I stood on my front porch, iced tea in hand, watching her step onto my lawn. She didn't hesitate. Brenda dropped to one knee, jammed the ruler into my dormant turf, and stared intently at the increments. 4 inches, Amy, Brenda called out, standing up and smoothing down her blouse. Your grass is a full inch over the maximum allowed height under Section 4, Paragraph B of our HOA regulations, and frankly, it looks completely dead. I stepped down from the porch and walked toward her, keeping my voice level. Brenda, the city put out an emergency drought mandate 2 weeks ago. Automated sprinklers are banned. If I water this lawn to keep it green or vibrant, the city will issue me a $500 fine. My grass isn't dead. It's dormant to conserve water. Brenda pulled a pen from behind her ear and began writing aggressively on her clipboard. The city's water restrictions are not the HOA's concern, Amy. When you bought this home, you signed a contract agreeing to maintain the aesthetic standards of this community. A dry, overgrown brown lawn hurts everyone's property value. So let me get this straight, I said, looking her dead in the eye. You want me to break municipal law, waste public drinking water during a severe crisis, and pay city fines just so you can look at green grass? I expect you to comply with the bylaws you agreed to, Brenda replied, tore off a bright pink paper slip from her clipboard, and thrust it toward my chest. This is a formal notice of violation. You have 7 days to restore your lawn to an acceptable green condition and trim it below 3 inches. Failure to comply will result in an initial fine of $100, compounding weekly. I took the slip without flinching. And what if I trim it now without watering it? Trimming stressed, dry grass will kill the root system completely, Brenda said with a cold, dismissive smile. Then you'll be cited for having dead turf, which carries a $200 weekly penalty, plus mandatory sod replacement. The choice is yours, Amy. Keep it green, keep it short, or keep paying. She didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel and marched straight toward Gary's house, clipboard raised, ready to issue her next citation. I stood on my driveway, looking down at the pink slip in my hand. Brenda had deliberately constructed a perfect legal trap. If I watered the lawn to keep it green and healthy, the city code enforcement officer would slap me with heavy municipal fines. If I left the lawn alone to obey the city's drought restrictions, Brenda would bleed me dry with weekly HOA penalties. If I mowed the dry grass to satisfy her ruler, I would kill the lawn entirely and face even harsher fines for dead property turf. It was a classic catch-22, designed to force homeowners into submission. Most people in my position would either pay the fines while cursing under their breath or illegally water their lawns late at night out of fear. But I didn't get angry, and I certainly didn't panic. Teachers deal with bullies every single day. The only difference is that adult bullies wear suits and carry clipboards. I walked back inside, placed the pink violation slip on my kitchen counter, and took a slow sip of my iced tea. Brenda wanted a war over rules. She was about to find out that two can play that game.
3 minggu berlalu, dan tirani Brenda beralih dari penyebal yang mengganggu menjadi persenjataan terhadap lingkungan. Every Monday morning, like clockwork, a new violation notice appeared in my mailbox. First fine was $100. The second was $200. By the third week, with compounding penalties and late fees, my total debt attached to my personal account stood at $750. Brenda wasn't just enforcing rules, she was weaponizing them to make an example out of anyone who prioritized municipal drought restrictions over her personal aesthetic standards. Other neighbors were cracking under the pressure. Gary folded on week 2, risking city fines by illegally setting his sprinklers to turn on at midnight. I can't afford this, Amy. he told me over the fence, his eyes red from stress. The HOA is threatening to revoke my community access, and my wife is sick with anxiety. Brenda won't listen to reason. Don't let her rattle you, Gary, I advised quietly. When a tyrant wants a fight, the worst thing you can do is let them see you sweat. On Thursday, a certified mail envelope arrived from the HOA's official legal management firm. Brenda had raised the stakes. The letter stated that if my outstanding fines were not settled in full within 30 days, the board would initiate legal proceedings to place a formal property lien on my home.
A lien meant I couldn't sell, refinance, or transfer my property without paying her extortionate demands. 10 minutes later, Brenda drove past my house in her white SUV. She pulled over near my driveway, rolled down her window, and adjusted her sunglasses. She was waiting for a breakdown. She wanted me to run out, wave the letter, and scream. That's how people like Brenda feed their ego, by watching reasonable people lose control. Instead, I walked down the driveway with a calm stride, holding the letter loosely in my hand. "Good afternoon, Brenda," I said, offering a polite smile. "I received your certified letter." Brenda rested her elbow on the door, looking down her nose at me. "I hope you understand the gravity of the situation now, Amy. The HOA board doesn't make empty threats. Pay the fines, fix your yard, or we will place a lien on this house. It's that simple." "I understand the situation completely," I replied, keeping my voice devoid of hostility. "You're doing what you feel you must do." Brenda smirked, mistaking my composure for weakness. "It's nothing personal. It's just board policy. I advise you to write the check before legal fees start piling on." "Thank you for the advice, Brenda," I said with a brief nod. "Have a wonderful afternoon." I turned around and walked back toward my house. In her rearview mirror, I saw her scowling, visibly frustrated that she hadn't gotten the hysterical reaction she anticipated. Inside, I sat at my dining table and laid the official lien warning side by side with the pile of weekly fines. My pulse was steady. 30 years of teaching middle school had taught me one truth. Screaming at a bureaucrat is a waste of energy. When someone bullies you with a rulebook, you don't fight back with emotion. You master their rulebook, find the flaws they missed, and use it to break them. Brenda believed she held all the cards because she held the title of board president. But titles are just paper, and power relies entirely on the legal framework supporting it. As a retired mathematics teacher, I had plenty of time, sharp analytical skills, and 30 days before her deadline. It was time to stop playing defense. I opened my laptop, grabbed a notepad, and prepared to systematically dissect every single line of our neighborhood's original founding documents. That night, I opened the heavy metal filing cabinet in my home office and pulled out the thick leather binder labeled Whispering Pines Estates, Founding Charter, 1978. When our neighborhood was established nearly 50 years ago, the original developers had drafted a comprehensive master deed containing every covenant, condition, and restriction, commonly known as the CC&Rs. Over 4 decades, successive board presidents had passed down scraps of paper, updated rules, and cosmetic amendments, but few ever bothered to read the foundational charter from cover to cover. Brenda certainly hadn't. She relied entirely on a simplified summary cheat sheet handed to her by the previous board president. For 3 consecutive nights, I sat at my dining table with highlighters, sticky notes, and a hot cup of black tea. I read through hundreds of pages of tedious legalese, cross-referencing every clause regarding property maintenance, lawn standards, and fine enforcement protocols. Brenda thought she was squeezing me into submission with her weekly notices, but in reality, she was giving me the time I needed to systematically dissect the very foundation of her authority. On the 4th night, around 2 in the morning, my finger stopped near the bottom of page 42, right on Article 9, Section 3, Subsection D, a forgotten clause buried deep within the original 1978 environmental conservation provisions. I read the text carefully, then read it again aloud to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. To ensure soil preservation, erosion control, and ecological stability during periods of environmental distress, homeowners retain the unalienable right to cultivate native ground cover, including but not limited to white clover, ecoturf, and regional wildflowers. Native ground cover shall be recognized as a valid permanent landscape feature and is strictly exempt from standard turf glass height limits, manicuring schedules, and irrigation mandates. My heart beat with a calm, steady rhythm. There it was, the golden legal exemption.
Saya pulled up the HOA's Digital Records Archive to verify if this specific section had ever been legally amended or repealed. According to the original bylaws, any modification to environmental conservation clauses required a unanimous 75% affirmative vote from all registered property owners in the subdivision. Brenda's board had passed several modern rule updates regarding grass height and weed control, but they had done so through simple board resolutions without a full community vote. The original 1978 master deed remained legally supreme and active. Brenda's entire enforcement campaign relied on defining my front yard as failing turf grass. The 3-inch maximum height rule applied strictly and exclusively to traditional turf grass like Kentucky bluegrass and Bermuda grass. Native ground cover, under the supreme founding documents of our own community, was completely exempt. To make my position entirely airtight, I spent the following morning at the county clerk's office and the State Environmental Protection Board. I retrieved official documents confirming that municipal drought emergency orders explicitly protected homeowners who transition their residential yards to water-wise landscaping, commonly known as deriscaping. State environmental protection statutes specifically forbid local homeowners associations from penalizing residents who installed native drought-tolerant ground cover during declared drought emergencies.
"You look like a woman with a plan, Amy," my neighbor Gary noted as he saw me walking back to my house carrying a heavy paper folder. "I don't just have a plan, Gary," I replied smoothly. "I have the legal high ground. Brenda is about to get a very thorough history lesson in contract law." I photocopied both documents, the 1978 HOA founding clause and the State Environmental Protection Statute, and highlighted the crucial sections with a bright yellow marker. I stapled them neatly and placed them inside a crisp white folder. Brenda thought she had me trapped between city fines and HOA penalties. She believed I had to choose between paying her thousands or letting my property go to ruin. She had no idea that I wasn't just going to pay or surrender. I was about to transform my yard into a legally protected, bulletproof statement that would strip her of every shred of power she held. At 7 o'clock on Friday morning, I made a call to a licensed local eco-landscaping firm specializing in native, drought-tolerant yards. The owner, a straightforward young man named Mark, came out 2 hours later to assess the property. I laid out the plan clearly: rip out every single square inch of traditional turf grass in my front yard, prep the soil, and plant a high-density Dutch white clover lawn interspersed with native wildflowers like California poppies and purple coneflowers. "You're completely getting rid of the turf?" Mark asked, looking surprised as he surveyed the golden, dormant yard. "Most HOAs in this county throw a fit over alternative lawns." "Our HOA board president certainly will," I said with a faint smile. "But I've checked our 1978 founding charter and state environmental codes. Native ground cover is legally protected, requires 0 municipal irrigation during a drought, and is exempt from turf grass height rules. Can you start today?" "For a client who knows her rights, we'll start in an hour," Mark grinned. By noon, a commercial sod cutter was humming in my front yard. A 3-man crew stripped away every patch of traditional turf, hauling the dead grass away in heavy utility trailers. They brought in a top layer of rich organic soil, spread heavy-grade Dutch white clover seed, and placed pre-sprouted native wildflower plugs strategically along the perimeter walkways. Clover is a remarkable plant. It fixes nitrogen naturally into the dirt, stays vibrant green with minimal moisture, requires no synthetic fertilizers, and reaches a mature height of 4 to 6 inches without ever needing weekly mowing. Around 3 in the afternoon, Brenda's white SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. She bolted out of her vehicle, her face flushing bright red as she watched the crew spread clover seed over my bare front yard. She practically stomped across the driveway, her clipboard trembling in her hand. "What on earth do you think you're doing, Amy?" Brenda shouted over the noise of the soil tiller. You are completely destroying the uniform aesthetic of this street. You cannot dig up your yard without prior architectural committee approval." I casually stepped over the lawn edging, holding my cup of tea. "Good afternoon, Brenda. I'm simply updating my landscaping to comply with municipal water restrictions while utilizing eco-friendly methods. This is unapproved construction. I am issuing you a $500 emergency fine right now for unauthorized property alteration." She scribbled furiously on her notepad. "Write down whatever you like," I replied calmly, taking a sip of my tea. "My contractors are licensed, insured, and following state environmental directives for drought management. Have a great day." She stormed off, muttering threats about immediate legal injunctions and property liens. I didn't waste a second arguing. Within 5 days, thanks to light evening mistings allowed under city hand-watering rules, the Dutch white clover burst into life. Where a dry, golden-brown lawn once stood, my front yard transformed into a dense, lush carpet of emerald green. Small white blooms began popping up, creating a vibrant, soft landscape that stayed perfectly healthy despite the scorching summer sun. It required 0 automatic sprinkler runs, 0 artificial chemical treatments, and 0 weekly cuts. By the end of the second week, my front yard was the only green property on the entire block that wasn't violating city water bans or incurring municipality penalties. It was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. I had followed every letter of the city drought laws while executing a completely legal loophole in the HOA's original founding bylaws. Now, with the final lien deadline approaching, Brenda was assembling her full board for an emergency site inspection. She thought she was arriving to deliver a knockout blow. Instead, she was walking straight into a legal trap of her own making. On Tuesday morning at 9 sharp, Brenda arrived at my house accompanied by 2 fellow HOA board members, Arthur and Susan. They carried leather binders, legal pads, and formal intent to lien paperwork. Brenda had scheduled this final site inspection to officially sign off on the foreclosure threat and cement her victory. But as her heels clicked against my driveway, her confident stride came to a sudden halt. Where a dead, dusty lawn had stood 3 weeks ago, my front yard was now a stunning, vibrant expanse of dark green Dutch white clover. Sprinkled throughout were blooming California poppies and purple coneflowers swaying in the breeze. It looked immaculate, elegant, and completely healthy despite the blazing summer heat wave. Arthur stood on the walkway, staring in genuine awe. "My goodness, Amy, this looks incredible. How are you keeping this green with the water restrictions?" "She didn't get board approval," Brenda snapped, her voice shrill as she glared at me. "This is an unauthorized property alteration. It breaks every aesthetic standard in our bylaws. You can't just replace turf grass with weeds and flowers." I was sitting at my patio table under the cool shade of my umbrella. On the table rested a pitcher of iced tea, 4 clean glasses, and a thick manila folder. "Good morning, Arthur, Susan," I said warmly, standing up. "Brenda, please have a seat. It's far too warm to be shouting in the driveway." Arthur and Susan sat down cautiously, but Brenda remained standing, her arms crossed tightly. "We aren't here for tea, Amy. We are here to finalize the lien process for $750 in unpaid turf grass violations, plus $500 for unapproved landscaping." "I assumed as much," I replied smoothly, tapping the manila folder, "which is why I prepared a legal briefing for the board before you sign anything you'll regret." I opened the folder and slid 2 stapled document sets across the glass table. 1 copy went to Arthur, 1 to Susan, and the third was placed directly in front of Brenda's empty chair. "Document number 1, I explained, pointing to the highlighted text on the first page, is a certified copy of our HOA's 1978 founding charter, specifically Article 9, Section 3. It explicitly grants homeowners the right to cultivate native ground cover, including clover to wildflowers, during ecological distress. Furthermore, native ground cover is completely exempt from standard turf grass height limits and manicuring schedules." Arthur adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the highlighted lines. "Well, I'll be. It's right here in the master deed." "Document number 2, I continued, is the official state environmental protection statute. It explicitly prohibits homeowners associations from issuing fines or liens against residents who convert traditional lawns to drought-tolerant ground cover during declared drought emergencies. Brenda snatched her copy, her eyes darting across the pages. Her face went pale as she reached the bottom section, detailing personal legal liability for board members who knowingly violate state environmental codes. To summarize, I said, leaning forward with a pleasant smile, my clover lawn is legally protected by our founding charter and backed by state law. Every fine you issued is legally null and void. And if this board attempts to place a lien on my property today, my attorney will file an immediate lawsuit against the HOA and against you personally, Brenda, for unlawful harassment, extortion, and breach of fiduciary duty. Arthur dropped his pen. Susan looked at Brenda in horror. Is this true, Brenda? Did you check the original master deed before issuing these fines? Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The paper in her hand trembled. She looked at the highlighted charter, then at the state statute, and finally at my green clover lawn. She was completely checkmated. I expect a written dismissal of all fines and a formal withdrawal of the lien threat in my mailbox by 5 o'clock tomorrow, I said softly, taking a sip of my tea. Have a wonderful day. Without a word, Brenda turned around and walked away, her head held low. Arthur and Susan followed quickly behind, leaving the lien paperwork forgotten on my patio table. By 4 o'clock the following afternoon, a crisp official letter from the HOA board was delivered directly to my mailbox. Signed by Arthur, the document confirmed that every single fine levied against my property over the past month had been formally dismissed, withdrawn, and completely erased from the association's records. The board officially categorized my front yard as a fully compliant, legally protected native ground cover installation under Article 9 of our 1978 founding charter. Brenda didn't even sign the document herself. Arthur had signed on her behalf in his capacity as vice president. Word of what transpired on my patio spread through Whispering Pines estates like wildfire. By Saturday morning, my front yard had turned into a local point of interest. The white clover had reached full bloom, casting a subtle, fragrant scent across the driveway, while butterflies and honeybees drifted peacefully over the blossoms. While every other yard on our street remained a scorched, dusty field of yellowing turf, my property looked like a lush oasis. Best of all, my municipal water meter had barely moved, saving thousands of gallons during the peak of the drought. Gary was the first neighbor to walk over with a notepad in hand. He stood at the edge of my walkway, admiring the soft green clover under his shoes. "Amy, everyone on the block is talking about what you pulled off," Gary said, a broad grin spreading across his face. Did you really find an forgotten clause in the original founding charter that Brenda completely missed? I simply read the contract we all signed when we bought our homes, Gary, I said, handing him a pre-printed folder from my porch table. Article 9, page 42. Native ground cover is protected under state environmental law and our master deed. You don't have to break city drought bans, and you certainly don't have to pay Brenda another dime. Gary accepted the folder as if it were solid gold. My wife and I are calling an eco-landscaper this afternoon. We're done letting her push us around. Within 2 weeks, a complete neighborhood transformation took hold across our street. Inspired by the legal precedent I had established, 6 other senior homeowners on our block hired local crews to strip their dying turf grass and install Dutch white clover and regional wildflowers. By the end of the month, nearly half the homes in Whispering Pines estates had transitioned to water-wise they're escaping. The neighborhood looked beautiful, unified, and environmentally responsible, all while keeping municipal water consumption at record lows. Brenda's authority collapsed like a house of cards. When a bully relies entirely on fear and bluffing, intimidation loses its power the moment someone exposes the legal reality. At the next monthly HOA meeting, Brenda attempted to propose new, restrictive aesthetic guidelines to regain control, but she was met with a room full of informed, empowered homeowners holding copies of the 1978 Master Deed. Arthur and Susan led a motion to strip the president of unilateral citation powers, requiring a full board majority vote for any future violation. Realizing her power trip was officially over, Brenda quietly resigned from her position as board president 2 weeks later. Now, when I sit on my front porch in the morning with a hot cup of black coffee, I look out over a neighborhood that is greener, smarter, and far more peaceful. I didn't have to raise my voice, slam a door, or engage in petty arguments on the driveway. I simply stayed patient, did my homework, and played the long game. Tyrants always crumble when you hold up a mirror made of facts, logic, and the law. And as far as I'm concerned, that is the most elegant victory of all.